Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to introduce a guest today, Nina Kleinberg. She is a certified nurse midwife. She has just recently retired from 30 years of practice at Holyoke, where she was a midwife there. I'm going to give you just a little bit of her background. She graduated in 1981 as a nurse midwife, and she had a home birth practice in Santa Monica, California for a while, the next 4 years. In the mid-1980s, she worked in an LA County USC hospital with our Susan DeJoy. So there's the circle. She moved to the Pioneer Valley in 1988, and this is where she's been a midwife for the last 30 years, as I mentioned. This is an interesting presentation, and I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it. She presented a similar one to this at ACNM at our annual meeting this past year, and it was widely praised and well received. And so I'm really excited that we get to see what she brought to the national convention here in our own local place. She studied film. She was a film editor for 10 years, so she knows her history. And she's going to bring you some very interesting insights, I think, with our film that we're about to just see some clips of and put other things together for historical context. I'm going to turn it over now, and thank you very much for coming and speaking with us.
Hi, folks. It's a pleasure to be here. I worked at Baystate from 1996 to 2001, and I see so many familiar faces. So let's get started. So for those of us of a certain age, it was one of those films that got us interested in midwifery and the alternatives to the standard practices of hospital birth that were then being practiced back in the 60s and 70s and way before that. I first saw this film at film school as an example of a documentary film that was made under very trying circumstances, and I will talk to you about that a little bit later. 10 years later, I saw it at midwifery school as an inspiration. But the people involved with this film, including this woman, Mary Coley, midwife, George Stoney, a documentary filmmaker, and two certified nurse midwives who back in the 50s had no idea that they were making a film that would become a classic. What they really thought they were making was a teaching film for the granny midwives of Georgia. I want to give you some historical context about the film, and then I'm going to talk to you a bit about how it was made, show you some of the film's highlights, and I also will share with you what this film meant for midwives of my generation. It depicts the work of a granny midwife in rural Georgia, helping her clients with prenatal care, delivery, postpartum care. Before we get started, I want to show you a brief clip from a feature film called The Fight for Life, which was made in 1940 about a very dedicated young physician who sees birth in the hospital and is determined to devote his life to making life better for laboring women. And it's very dramatic, and here it is. Recognize a fetoscope?
heartbeat 150.
It's kind of hard to find the mother in all of this. Oh, there she is. So shortly after the scene, the mother dies, though it's not completely clear why. This was a feature film. It was seen by the public. The musical score was actually nominated for an Academy Award. Hard to believe, but clearly doctors wanted to reassure people that giving birth in the hospital, because up till not that long ago, 60, 70 years ago, most births took place at home. They made a film to reassure mothers that it was a good and safe place to have a baby, in the hospital.
After the doctor has learned all he needs to know concerning you and the baby, a nurse will shave off your pubic hair and give you an enema to help clear the way for your baby's birth. During the first stage, helpful doses of medicine may be given to you if you need them. They will relieve some of the discomfort that your labor will be causing you and give you a peaceful state of mind.
During the entire film, the woman is kept in bed on her back. Just FYI.
When the mouth of the uterus has opened completely, the second stage of labor begins, and soon you will be taken to the delivery room. The delivery room is much like the doctor's examination room. Its main piece of furniture is the delivery table, where your baby will be born. There is a table with sterile drapes to cover your abdomen, legs, and buttocks, and with sterile gowns, towels, and rubber gloves for the doctors and nurses. Everything is absolutely sterile to protect you and the baby. There will be sterile solutions to wash you with just before the baby arrives. And there will be a cord tie set to tie off the umbilical cord through which the baby has been getting its food in the uterus. There will also be various sorts of anesthetics. For example, a continuous caudal anesthetic set, a saddle block anesthetic set, and there will be gas available. Some mothers, perhaps you, may want a certain kind of anesthetic. Feel free to ask for it, but by all means leave the decision in your doctor's hands. Keep your mind free of worry and hurry. You can rely on your doctor and his helpers, you know. They've brought a lot of babies into the world.
Okay, so we've now arrived at 1950, and this is when physicians and hospitals began to work on a new model for care of the laboring mother. It was a concept very new at that time called rooming in. But it was more than just the concept of the baby and the mother staying together. There were all kinds of things that needed to happen, including redesigning the entire labor and delivery suite. And every one of the comments that you're about to hear in this film was revolutionary. It was changing people's minds.
Surgical and medical progress has made motherhood safer than ever before.
Childbirth has become a hospital experience for the majority of American mothers. Equally important as meeting physical needs, however, is recognizing the feelings and attitudes of mothers. For mothers are as individual as their babies. Learning about her baby while still in the hospital can be of great value, especially to the inexperienced mother.
Again, a new
Here
concept.
she can be helped to develop confidence as a parent. A scheduled tour of the maternity division of a hospital gives prospective parents information about facilities and what to expect when the wives are admitted for delivery. Parents see in plain view the attention given to newborn infants. They like the shades up practice, which keeps open to view all nurseries, even the ones for prematures. The policy of allowing a patient and her husband to see each other during the early stages of labor adds to their feeling of ease. The needs of the mother determine the type of anesthesia used. The immediate postpartum reactions of both mother and infant depend largely on their degree of narcosis. A good many women prefer to be awake when their babies are born.
Now, the reason he makes this comment about a good number of mothers prefer to be awake is that it was a very common practice up until this time to use something called twilight sleep. Any of you know what twilight sleep is? A combination of morphine and scopolamine, and the women wouldn't be asleep. They would often get wild and thrash about and feel everything, which was why women were tied down during labor. But then they woke up and they had forgotten everything. It was kind of an induced amnesia that took place. For example, my mother always told me that I was born at 8 in the morning. When I got my birth certificate, it turned out I was born at 2:30 in the morning, and she said, oh, that must have been 8 o'clock when I woke up and they told me what I'd had. And I recently talked to Tina Krutsky, a midwife some of you know, who gave birth in 1969. And she, at that point, was tied down. Her husband was not allowed to be with her. Her family was never allowed to visit her at all during her hospital stay. So we're talking not about ancient history, and this was in a big fancy hospital in Westchester, New York. Okay, let's keep going with some of the recommendations from this film about rooming in.
A separate waiting room for fathers and relatives means less corridor traffic, fewer calls made upon the hospital staff, and a more relaxed atmosphere for the maternity division. A variety of room and nursery arrangements is available. This is a 2-bed unit that looks directly into a 4-crib proximity nursery. Here each mother has her baby in view in the nursery, or she may have him beside her bed, as much or as little as she likes, except during visiting hours. Some single rooms have their own nurseries. Here the father too, when gowned and masked, can get acquainted early with his baby. This single room approaches the ideal of combining the professional facilities of a hospital with the satisfactions of home.
So this was the situation in the 40s and early 50s when the film that we're going to talk about was made. This was the situation for people with the right color skin, i.e. white, and enough money to deliver in a hospital. But that was not always the case. It was very different in the South, where people of color and people both black and white who didn't have money, living in poverty, no access to prenatal care, they were having their babies at home. They were not allowed to be admitted to the hospitals. And the Georgia Department of Public Health decided that the granny midwives, mostly black, who had performed over 25,000 deliveries the previous year, needed a training film to help them develop their skills. And so they contacted the person who made this film and asked him, would he please come and make a teaching film for the granny midwives? And that person was this man. This is George Stoney. He was based in New York, but he grew up in the South, and he remembered seeing the granny midwives walking with their bags to deliveries. He'd often give them rides. He always had wanted to make a film about their work. And so when he was contacted by the Georgia Department of Public Health, he jumped at the chance. He was a diligent filmmaker. He did his homework. His only direction from the Georgia Department of Public Health was he was given a list of 118 teaching points. And he was told he needed to incorporate those 118 teaching points into his film. How he would do it would be his decision. Politically and socially, what he was going to do was very touchy in pre-civil rights movement rural Georgia. He was going to be a white man directing a white film crew, going into a poor black neighborhood and interacting intimately with the women and their families. And to help him, he recruited the assistance of a black physician named William Mason, who would be his entree into this community. Now, a black man and a white man traveling together in the rural South in the early 50s was looked on with great suspicion in Albany, Georgia. They had to sleep in separate hotels. They had to eat at separate restaurants. And everywhere they went, they had to explain what they were doing to both the black community and, for their safety, more importantly, to the local sheriff, who was often a member of the Ku Klux Klan, who thought that they were there to stir up trouble. They were white Northerners coming down to stir up trouble. George Stoney had been born in the South, and he could put on the Southern accent when he needed to. But he had to reassure people that he was not there to cause a problem. The first thing he did was he started interviewing midwives. And he interviewed lots and lots of midwives, but he kept coming back to this woman. Her name was Mary Coley, and he finally decided that she was the best person to represent what he was trying to show. But Mary Coley was not originally his first choice. He was very worried that she looked like the stereotypical Southern black woman. And from his Northern perspective, it looked too stereotypical to him, too much like Mammy in Gone with the Wind. But he kept coming back to her because she was so unlike Mammy. She looked him straight in the eye. She was not deferential. And she looked like she was sizing him up to see if this is something she wanted to do. She was a woman in her 50s with 9 children. She'd been a community midwife at that point for 20 years. And she was someone who not only attended births, but took the women for their prenatal care, came to their home afterwards and did baby care, and generally served the function of the support person for the women she took care of.
Mrs. Mary Coley delivered my daughter.
Miss Mary Coley delivered 3 of my children.
Miss Mary Coley delivered all 6 of my children. Miss Mary delivered 1 of my kids out of my 4.
Miss Mary Coley delivered me.
Miss Mary delivered our baby daughter.
2 of my children were delivered by Miss Mary Frances Coley.
She would come in the morning time and bathe that baby and give me a bath. And if I hadn't ate that morning. We had a wood stove. She'd go in there and make that fire and fix my breakfast. She was just really a very fine lady.
She didn't care if I was white or if I was black or whatever. She was doing just as much for me as she would have been if it had been a black lady. Didn't matter to her, and it did not matter to me.
If I stumble on my way, don't let anger let me stay. I am willing.
So she was also a member of the very progressive Church of God, which was a black church that preached equality of the races. And before she agreed to do it, she went to her congregation, she went to her pastor, and sought permission from her community to allow this white film crew into the intimate lives of the black members of her community. She also cut a deal with George Stoney that she would talk in her own voice and use her own narration rather than the very sophisticated white narration that he proposed to her. She controlled the look and sound of this film all the way. And she did not need a film to teach her that her job was to get to know her patients, taught in that previous film clip you saw. And she knew intuitively, as midwives have always known, that friendship and trust between midwife and patient was one of the keys to a healthy delivery.
But I remember 4 years ago, she was so scared, I had to take her to the clinic myself.
A local woman named Martha Sapp agreed to be photographed giving birth only after she saw the white women in Stoney's previous film and felt, well, if they could do that, then it would be okay for her to do that. But you've got to understand that except for the actual birth that you see in this film, everything else was staged. It was reenacted. There's a second woman who gives birth in the film, and she's portrayed as someone who is poverty-stricken, depressed, in need of help. And that was actually a local woman, a student at Albany State College. And she agreed to play the part, and the part of her husband was actually played by Mary Coley's son. It looks realistic.
Over here. The stairwell has been enclosed, open before. We did the same with Adam and Maribel here, going out that door right there.
Now, shooting under these conditions that were available in rural Georgia was a challenge. The local electric company had to actually put in electric lines because there was no electricity to run the cameras and the rest of the equipment. And if you ever get a chance to watch the film, you'll notice that there's almost no synchronized sound because they just didn't have the equipment or the funds or the technicians to do it. There's actually a shack where this woman gives birth, and let me just go back just a second here.
Over here.
And they actually had to cut that window. They actually had to cut that window in the shack because the shack had no light at all, and they had to cut a window. That's how primitive these conditions were under which this film was made, which is why it was shown in my film school. Let me just talk a minute here. Mary's careful preparation, Stoney was able to demonstrate all 118 points, including the importance of taking a good history.
And how did you get along with all your pregnancies? Our first one come dead. The next one dropped before she got far along with it. Well, you just got to see a doctor. Maybelle, I tell you what to do. Come on down to the clinic Friday morning, yeah?
That's not going to hurt you.
Course not. It's not going to hurt you. y'all stop by for me, I'll go with you.
Thank you, Miss Mary. I'll bring you by.
All right.
The film talks about the importance of good nutrition.
Now, the nurse is always advised with the patients on what to eat and how to take care of themselves. Miss Penny, she keeps a sharp eye for the puny patients, like Maybelle. And if they eat what she said eat, they mostly gets along okay.
The film also talks about the importance of recognizing danger signs.
Lady's ankle is all swelled up. That's another bad sign. In the clinic, they keep checking on 3 things: the patient's weight, her blood pressure, and her urine. This lady's clinic chart shows that she has been putting on too much weight, especially in the last 2 months. Her blood pressure has been going up likewise, way above what it ought to be. When they tested her urine, it showed up cloudy, full of albumin, the doctor said. Instead of water clear, like a well mother's. After Dr. Newton got through explaining all of that, then the lady agreed herself it was better to let the doctor weed them.
The big thing they hammered again and again and again was cleanliness. There was a perception that you could not keep clean under these conditions, and so they hammered away at the concept of cleanliness. I once attended a screening of this film that George Stoney was at, and he talked about these midwives were so oppressed by this insistence on cleanliness that they actually kept 2 bags, one to show the doctor and one that they actually took to the deliveries.
Two days ago, a baby delivered by a midwife died when it ought to have lived. As your health officer, it was my duty to find out why that baby died. My examination showed that his cord got infected, and you all know what that means. Something wasn't clean. Maybe the midwife didn't boil her scissors long enough. Or it could have been that the dressing she used wasn't sterile. Or it might have been that she got in a hurry and didn't wash her hands well. Now, you midwives in this county have built up a wonderful reputation. You work hard, and I know how difficult it is to keep things clean in some of the homes where you have to go.
That's right.
But your record shows that you can keep clean.
It's insistent on demonstrating clean technique, as you will see in the next sequence, which is an actual birth. I want you to notice something when you see the next sequence, which is the actual birth. You will notice that her hands never touch the mother, only the baby. They were instructed never to touch the mother because they weren't provided with gloves.
Ida, we got us another healthy little boy.
Other teaching points included the management of the third stage of labor.
Here it comes. You just rest easy now, Ida. Want to make sure now the other baby's all here. See, Aunt Mary, I shake it up like this to see if it's all here. Cause if any left inside the mother, she'll continue to bleed. Yes, it all come in one piece. Now you just rest back, Ida, until I clean you up a little bit.
And another teaching point, the importance of follow-up care.
Next morning, I go to see how Ida and her baby get along. Look like everything's fine with Ida. Most of my patients have learned by now, you don't put on anything but a sterile dressing. No grease, no powder. Cords dry up best that way and keeps a lot cleaner.
So after the filming, Stoney handed the footage over to Sylvia Cummings, who was the editor. And I'm going to pause here to say a couple things. First of all, I was an editor, and this was truly one of the only jobs you could get in the film industry. One of the few jobs you could get in the film industry if you were a woman. And if you'd like me to come back and give you a talk about the film industry and the Me Too movement, I'd be very happy to do that. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Sylvia Cummings, the only woman besides Mary Coley credited in this film. And the music was performed. He found a local chorus who did all the music. Stoney always said that he made his films with two purposes. One, to give his client what they wanted, that in that case, the Georgia Department of Public Health, and the other was to create a documentary that could be used as propaganda. This simple film, created as a teaching film, went on to have a life of its own that none of its participants could have predicted. The state of Georgia sold it internationally to 20 different countries to be dubbed into local languages and used as a teaching film. In India, physicians used it to promote midwifery, claiming that it showed how much respect American physicians had for midwives, and no one had the heart to tell them that this was not actually the case. The Georgia Department of Public Health actually provided an accompanying pamphlet with this film, stating that the medical profession was not endorsing midwives, rather seeing them as a quote unquote temporary and unfortunate necessity. Stoney and Mary Coley went up to New York to show the film at the Flaherty Film Festival, which gave awards for documentaries. They couldn't give it a documentary award because it was actually a reenactment. But it was given a special award, and Bosley Crowther, who some of you with a little gray hair may remember as the film critic for the New York Times, sat at Mary Coley's feet and interviewed her and wrote a glowing review of the film. In 2002, it was selected by the Library of Congress for their film preservation project, and these were awards given to films of cultural, historic, and/or aesthetic significance. The film had a profound effect on my generation of midwives. Those of us who came to midwifery in the 60s and 70s, it grew out of our participation in the feminist movement and who believed in home birth and quote-unquote natural birth as a viable option. And for us, Mary Coley served as a role model. We saw things in this film that were not happening in hospitals.
You are doing fine. You can walk around some if you want to.
Women were encouraged to get up and walk around in labor.
You remember what I told you the last time, Ida, about nursing your baby right off? That'll make your wound drop and you won't lose so much blood. Yeah, smart little booger. He's catching on to the idea right quick.
Now, this took place within minutes of the birth. In hospitals, most women were not allowed to breastfeed for the first 24 hours because it was felt that the breast milk was harmful to the baby, and most likely it was because it was so full of narcotics and other medications. The family was admitted into the room shortly after birth and was very involved in taking care of the mother. Over 50 years later, Stoney spoke about the effect his film had had for the next generation of physicians, nurses, and midwives.
So many people here have seen the film early on, particularly the health workers, and have learned from it.
I was in the associate degree nursing program at the time, enrolled in obstetrical nursing, and our nursing professor actually required that we see the film for all my babies. They actually used that film, I was a nursing major, and they used the film of all my babies as part of the instructions in our OBGYN course. It brought back a lot of memories to see that All My Babies film. It was, the documentary was so well put together. It was so realistic. I came in on the tail end of home deliveries. So when I was a student, they were still delivering at home, and we went to a home delivery. And it was very, very much like what it was in the 50s. So it was so true to what we saw, but it's so much of what people have forgotten. The care at home, the personality, you let nature take its course.
We knew all this before, and now we're making a full 360-degree turn to come back to the understanding that birth is a natural process, and people are more comfortable in the more natural settings, in the more natural processes, what midwives have always known.
George Stoney went on to teach film at New York University, where he continued to work until his death at age 96. He was known as the father of public television, public access television, because he promoted the concept of giving a voice to people who did not have other ways of communicating their ideas to the general population. Mary Coley went on to deliver babies for the rest of her life. She raised 9 kids, many of whom became college graduates inspired by their brilliant mother. And she inspired generations of midwives who followed her. I want to encourage all of you to watch this film. I actually have copies. If any of you would like a copy of the film to take home, It's wonderful to watch all the way through and remember all the wonderful lessons that we learned from Mary Coley. Thank you.